Hello, it's Craig Thompson, and this is the Stratford Slice. Here on the Stratford Slice, we've been focusing a lot these last few weeks on topical issues related to housing, the economy, and of course, more recently, the tariff, the trade war that President Donald Trump has inflicted upon Canada and Mexico, and to a lesser extent, China. So I've been reaching out to people that I know to get their insights and advice. And one such person is my guest today. Dan Mathieson is a lifelong advocate of the city of Stratford. He served 5 terms as mayor, overseeing strong economic growth and playing a pivotal role across Southwestern Ontario, primarily in a lot of developments related to manufacturing and the auto sector. He's now in private business and investment and serves as a consultant, providing strategic advice on matters relating to the intersection between government and business. Dan Mathieson, welcome to the Stratford Slice.
Thanks for having me, Craig. I appreciate it.
How are you feeling watching all the headlines emerge and how the stock markets were reacting to this 30-day reprieve, this temporary reprieve that Canada seems to have gotten, along with Mexico, to the threat of the tariffs?
Well, I was quite alarmed on the weekend, to be honest. There's a lot of things at play, not only within our own community of Stratford, but in the broader Southwestern Ontario region, Ontario, and then, of course, Canada. And a lot of it is outside of our control. And for many people, the stock market is a daunting place to invest to begin with, underlying the fundamentals and the basics of it, but then having repercussions on whims of U.S. presidents making comments and, of course, laying out strategies on weekends. People just wonder what it means to them financially. And it means everything from employment to retirement savings. And I think it was a pretty daunting 72 hours for a lot of people from Saturday until, of course, yesterday's reprieve.
People I know who were involved in some of the negotiations said when they spoke to either his cabinet nominees or those who had already been confirmed, there's mixed messaging coming from different levels of the Trump administration as to the motivation of these tariffs. We don't even know what the rules of the game are that we're playing.
For sure. And I think it's really clear. There are the professionals that are in the U.S. government that are at the bureaucratic level who understand international trade agreements, and the interdependency between Canada and the U.S. and everything from energy, such as hydro, to natural gas, and of course, crude oil. And then there are those in the cabinet that are the appointees of the president who understand their role, but also don't want to run afoul of the boss and are running interference and telling maybe the broader story behind the scenes in those independent meetings between cabinet ministers, heads of the Auto Parts Manufacturers Association, congressmen and members of parliament. And then there's the president himself, a communicator who likes to keep people off balance, who likes to win at all costs, and in most cases likes to really challenge people to be out of their comfort zone. And I think what he wanted to do on the weekend was make Justin Trudeau, someone who I don't think has a very strong relationship with the president, feel out of his comfort zone. And in doing so, he made 41 million Canadians a little anxious. He made a lot of business owners and a lot of individuals with pride and nationalistic pride in Canada, with our U.S. allies, very upset. And I think this is going to be something Canadians are going to have to get used to until we get used to the new normal and we understand the trajectory we're on.
Melanie Joly, in her news conference on the weekend, said that in her meeting with Marco Rubio, the issue of Canada becoming the 51st state wasn't even mentioned. It was all about fentanyl and immigration and those two items, priority items for the Americans. Yet Trump reiterated on the weekend that all of this can go away if Canada succumbs and becomes the treasured or cherished 51st state.
Well, the thing about that is there's the messages that go with that. I think it's in jest. He said it, first of all, when Prime Minister Trudeau had made the trip to Mar-a-Lago with Chrystia Freeland and Dominic LeBlanc for a very one-on-one meeting. And I think that in itself, was the start of what was said in gist. But I think he understood. Trump Trump watches the news. He studies X. He sees what's on social media. He knows that drew the ire of not only our prime minister, but elected officials in the government and most Canadians. So I think he knows that he's got a button that he's pushing with us. And it goes along with the assertion that Denmark should give up Greenland and that the Panama Canal should become home. And we're now in the Gulf of America. People like Puerto Rico and other territories are wondering when they get to be the 51st state. So it's interesting times dealing with them. We just have to understand that everything you've ever learned about government, anything you've ever watched from a U.S. president or bilateral and international trade is out the window.
Dan, as you know, Southwestern Ontario is heavily reliant on the automotive sector, and a typical part in a car goes across the border at least 8 times. The companies in Mexico, in America, and Ontario are so integrated. One has to wonder, what is he thinking when he's saying tariffs will apply to that industry? It's just going to damage not only Canadian jobs, Canadian businesses, but the Americans who rely on those parts. They can't just invent new factories overnight and restock their shelves.
Well, it's pretty, to me, interesting that he chose the auto sector as one, where he says, hey, you've got nothing we don't have. 1 in 8 jobs in Southwestern Ontario rely on the automotive sector. If he was thinking of how he could inflict maximum pain on his nemesis, Justin Trudeau, saying that you don't have any energy that we need and you don't have any cars we can make our own, is a good way to get people's attention. Then you throw in the lost leader of my American banks tell me they can't do business in Canada, and right away you've got the justification where people are like, wow, what's going on here? Needless to say, also, you have Michigan. He has a governor there that's Democratic, Gretchen Whitmer, who he does not like. And he looks down in through that region. So I think he's just playing pawns. And I think for him, it's a way to keep people off balance. There's not a lot of people speaking up, challenging him in the Republican Party or
That's
in the
because
Congress.
everybody's afraid to speak up for fear of retribution.
Absolutely. John Thune, the Senate leader from South Dakota, who would have an awful lot to lose in a trade war with Canada with tariffs, stayed silent through the whole weekend. Those are the things that I look at and say, okay, we have to accept that behind the scenes, there is a lot of diplomacy and push going on in the American system that we're not privy to. But people like Flavio Volpe, good friend of mine, CEO of the Auto Parts Manufacturers Association, he's talking to Mary Barra at General Motors. He's talking to people at Ford. He's talking to the automakers. They're telling them that they're behind the scenes pushing. So we know that the industrial complex, if you want to call it the automakers, the auto parts manufacturers of America, are pushing back behind the scenes, but nobody wants to stick their head above the sand and say, hey, President Trump, take a shot at me because I'm going to take one of you.
And the only people to take shots at right now are the Canadians. We're the only ones sticking our heads up over the ridge.
Absolutely, and I think the Prime Minister hit a great tone on Saturday night in his remarks, where he talked about being on the beaches in Normandy, the peninsulas of the Korean Peninsula, talking about 9/11 and some of the special times that we've had to step up Iran hostage, and we were there for our Americans. I think Saturday night we hit a low in our country, booing the American national anthem. That's not us. We're not going to get anywhere by doing that, but I understand the sentiment. I think a lot of people were upset. But at the end of the day, we just have to stay cool and stay our course. We're Canadian, and we supply a lot of goods to the Americans. And you think about the deficit that Trump talks about. I saw a very good analogy of the deficit of what it reaches as a per capita basis. Canadians spend on average $7,300 a year on American goods. Americans per capita only spend $1,500 a year on Canadian goods. Well, the deficit in when you look at the deficit in terms of money, Canada's ahead, but on a per capita basis, we're actually behind. Yeah. And those are the things we got to keep in mind, because the real economists, the people giving policy discussions in the United States the shape and advising the president, are always going to be in his ear reminding him of those things.
There was some chatter also over the weekend about Elon Musk that, we've invested a lot in Ontario in EV production with Stellantis and Volkswagen and Honda. And of course, we have a lot of the critical minerals for batteries. But, Tesla is facing competition in China, and he has the ear of Donald Trump. So one wonders, where the Tesla situation fits into the auto equation.
For sure. And there's a couple of manufacturers in Stratford, I won't name them, that make parts for the Tesla, or did in the past, that ship them down to California and Texas. So there are a connection to that. But you're right. He's seen billions of dollars go into his competition. He's seen PowerCo come over from Germany. He's seen us do something with Stellantis and LG from Korea. So it's no wonder that he gets a little jealous, and that he might be driving policy that's in the best interest of Elon Musk, as someone who had $400 billion and counting for a net worth, makes far more in these policy discussions off book and investments than the automakers of Canada would make in a regular year. And I think those are some of the things we just have to be mindful of. Policy decisions are not being driven by discussion and bilateral trade, but by personal interests of some of the most influential people of the world.
Since you were involved in municipal politics for so many 5 terms as mayor, you have a pretty good sense of the mood within Southwestern Ontario in municipal government. What advice do you think you would give, not just to municipal leaders, but to workers and people who are invested in local economies?
So first of all, I think this is a time for us to all sit down and do our own stock. Where do we sit on our own personal finances? Are we running too close to the vest? Is being 3 days away, like they were in the auto parts sector, that if we had those tariffs, we could be shutting down factories within 3 or 4 days? Or is that going to have catastrophic impacts on our lives? And I think for some of us, we need to look at our own personal finances. Then we have to think about how we are going to invest our money and where we're doing our buying power. And are we buying Canadian? Are we supporting local? Are we doing whatever we can? That's what we need to do as individuals, and not lose our cool and understand this is beyond our control, and there's no sense having anxiety over things we can't do anything about. For my municipal leaders in Southwestern Ontario, I'd say this: make sure that you understand what the government has available. Skills Training and Development Ontario, federal government skills training program. Make sure that you know how you're going to access them, so that when our auto parts manufacturers or industries go out, that we can get the skills and the financial support for families that are needed. Look at our own social services, social safety net. Are our food banks getting support? How can we make sure they're ready for that challenge? And then lastly, if I could think about it from a national standpoint of what we need to be prepared about, now's the time for the provinces and the federal government to stop talking about interprovincial trade barriers, to figure out how to remove them as soon as possible, how to allow not only the flow of goods, but the flow of workers. We've identified time and time again. I've been on trade missions with the federal and provincial government. I've been in trade talks. I went to the G7 once as a Canadian delegate. We talk about that being something we can do to increase our own GDP within the country, and of course, how we can actually lead to wealth dispersion across the country amongst all of our residents. But we've never got around to doing it. Now's the time to make sure we do it, so that we're ready to take on these challenges. And then we need to look at what we've done with the comprehensive economic trade agreement with Europe, and what we're doing.
The EU is coming up in the news now as it being a potential partner. And you and I have both been to the Indo-Pacific frequently on missions, but it still represents a very small part of our whole, economic menu.
Absolutely. And we need to now put a concerted effort into diversifying into some of those markets and getting new partners. And it's tough to leave an old friend like the United States behind. They're not going to starve without us, but we can also start to find a way to insulate ourselves from these whims that we're going to see over the next 49 to 50 months until someone completely leaves the White House.
That's someone being Donald Trump.
Yeah, maybe. At the end of the day, I think a lot of people will say this. They can't believe 80 million people voted from the United States. I'm not sure everyone bought into the whole program, but they bought into parts of it. Economic stability, for
national
the country,
pride,
national pride, returning jobs, affordability of groceries, all those. There's some piece in that whole message he had that people bought maybe 1 or 2 pieces of a 9 or 10 piece pie.
They didn't buy the buffet. They didn't buy the buffet.
Right. Absolutely. They didn't sign up. They didn't sign up for that.
You mentioned friendships. You and I both have a lot of friends in the United States. What are your friends saying to you about what they think is going on?
Well, it's interesting. You talk to some of them. Some don't even know about the tariffs, or in the case of somebody I spoke to today, they knew about them but didn't understand the implication it would have on our economy. We also then went from there into the 51st state comment. And I said this to them: if I had asked you to give up your statehood, if I was to ask you to not be a proud American anymore, like I'm a proud Canadian, and to forget about what my grandfathers and great uncles and people before them fought in world wars next to Americans to preserve democracy and to assure peace in the world, would you be happy to say that the American flag disappeared tomorrow and it became Canadian? Resoundingly, every one of them said no. I said, so imagine what a proud country of 41 million people feel like when our closest friend and neighbor did it. And it's amazing. A lot of them then go, you know what, that's right. That's not funny. But, early on, until they put themselves in that situation, they never think of it. And it's easy for them not to. When you have 400 million people in the world and you're American, you're the largest superpower, you don't have to think about other people's feelings. And so I just keep telling the message to them of what it means to our economy, our communities, and what it means to our national pride. And for the most part, all of them get it. The ones that don't, and I had a couple who have said things like, we got to worry more about America than we worry about you guys. I remind them about crude oil at 1 million barrels a day. We're by far the largest producer, over 2 times what the balance of Colombia, Venezuela, the Saudis, and the own American production provide. Yeah. So they just have to keep thinking about that, let alone the critical minerals that they need, from nickel to cobalt to uranium, potash for their fertilizers. They need us. They don't want to admit it, but we're an important neighbor.
Yeah, I think it's the 51st state that is making Canadians most upset. It's quite frankly offensive, as you said. If the tables were turned, I don't think the Americans would react as politely as the Canadians have. Initially, we were laughing it off. Oh, it's just a joke, and now he's just grinding it in for maximum impact.
Absolutely, and I think once he knew that we were upset about it, it made it even more fun for him to do that.
So, Dan, I'm gathering that you're a little more optimistic than some of the people that we've been seeing in the media about how this might play out, or do you still have some serious concerns?
I'm 70-30, 70% feeling confident. Yesterday, Saturday night, the Prime Minister said he had not had a call with the President in almost 2 weeks. Yesterday, he was able to get 2 calls with him. One in the morning with the President, that of course came out, said he had one. And then the Prime Minister said they were having another one at 3.
Wasn't that because the stock market reacted yesterday morning? And
yeah, maybe. But he also had one with Mexico. Right. The other piece was at 3 o'clock, he pronounced that he was able to get $1.3 billion border deal out of us, which we announced back in December. We announced a fentanyl Cesar for the border, which, that's great when you only had 48 pounds of fentanyl come over from Canada. And we announced a number of other measures, 24-hour eyes on the border, all those things. It means not a lot. What really means a lot now is what the next 29 days bring. What is really the issue that we need to concentrate on? And if it's, further improvements at the border, it's spending on military, let's get to the heart of the matter of what you really want to do. And I think he's making an example for us on some of these issues because it makes it easier for him to go to the EU and the 27 members there and the members of NATO to then argue that they need to do more. And I think Mexico and Canada get pulled in because we're close and it's easy to beat up those that you love most. And then he went after China with a very small poke at 10%. And I think that was just, so that he could say he went after China. But at the end of the day, we're just part of a roadmap he's got, which unfortunately nobody knows. They haven't seen it, that he's just trying to take into the White House.
Yeah, he's inventing it as he goes along in some ways. It's pure emotion and speculation.
Absolutely. There's not, at the end of the day, no one's going to say this is this theory of democracy. This is this theory of trade. He used this methodology. It's the Donald Trump playbook. As some people said, it's the art of the deal.
Yeah. In 30 days, we still will have a lame duck prime minister because I think the deadline falls before the March 8th leadership vote for the new Liberal leader. So it'll be prior to Justin Trudeau exiting the stage. So we'll still be in a situation where we don't have, continuity of leadership. And at the same time, during the next few weeks, we have a provincial election, which a lot of people are debating the merits of. Is now the best time to have an Ontario election in the middle of a trade war? But we have it, and on February 27th, we're going to be going to the polls for the government of Ontario. So,
yeah, and I think the government of Ontario, they will be ready to deal with whatever they need to when they come back. early in March. I think that's safe to assume. I think the Trudeau piece, I think you're going to see another forestall of event where we're going to be able to stave them off again. And then I think we're going to go through probably 6 months to 9 months of really unstableness here, where we look at the federal government possibly having a confidence vote later in March, a spring election, a new budget come in, and then, of course, new development of relations between either a liberal leader or a conservative leader. I think those are the two parties that have got the chance to form a government, and I think you're going to see those. And then I think we'll get to the second half of this year, heading towards September, when we'll start to see substantive discussion around what really are the issues that Trump wants us to address and how we're going to go about doing it. Along the way, the task force the Prime Minister's put in place, you look at who's on that task force. They are incredibly qualified Canadians of different stripes, leading different organizations, and I think they will hold the fort as best as possible until we can get to that substantive negotiation stage.
And Dan, the tariffs are one layer of a multifaceted suite of issues we have right now in Canada: housing affordability, healthcare, primary care. It's as if we need another issue on our agenda to deal with. It just seems to be we're being overwhelmed with crises left, right, and center.
Well, and really, I think at the end of the day, we need to focus on 2 or 3 of them and not all of them. And I think the 3 things that matter most: if you don't have financial security, you don't have the ability to deal with your health or your housing. So we need to concentrate and keep our eyes on the tariffs from a national and provincial level, but there's nothing we can do locally around that other than be wise with our money and along the way. And then I think for the other 2 levels of government, we need to start figuring out at the federal and provincial level what we're going to do around housing affordability, because I think that will drive a lot of it for us to get ourselves back. And then, it's not going to happen in the next 2 years at best, but the interprovincial trade and the movement of labor is something we need to get at so we can start boosting our own domestic.
And we just built a new bridge between Windsor and Detroit, named after Gordie Howe.
Yeah, which was financed by the Canadian government. Yeah. So, our partnerships are still there. We still have friends on both sides of the border. We consume the same media, same entertainment they do. They love our Justin Bieber as much as we love their NFL game on Sunday at the Super Bowl. We coexist well. We're both proud nations, and we just have to get through this very difficult time.
Apart from just managing our own affairs, is there any sort of positive message you can give to people who might be listening about what they can do themselves, more as a proud Canadian individual than managing your job or your pocketbook? What can we do to join together here?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is look at Made in Canada and Product of Canada and understand what they are. Made in Canada could be an assembly of parts from around the world, and we have a piece of the job was finished here. A product of Canada meant it was substantively made, grown, or done here in Canada, which is important. And then I think what we have to do is raise the level of discourse in this country. We have fallen a little bit towards the American side of this, where the vitriol gets pretty harsh and the sides can't ever talk. The best way for us of 41 million people to go up against someone with 400 million is to make sure that while we have respectful disagreements and we debate policy, that we stay respectful and we move forward as a nation. And I think that's the thing we have to work on, because if they divide us and we become fighting from within with each other, then they've started to win, and it'll erode our ability to respond collectively and in a very passionate and effective manner. Well, and that's all. Let's make sure we don't lose the ability to have dialogue and discussion and to move forward.
Well, as you mentioned, the task force the Prime Minister's put together and also the premiers seem to be singing from the same playbook now. There was some discord initially, but I think now that they see this as a real threat, that people are starting to pull together, and I think they're listening to that advice. So
for sure, you look at Danielle Smith, who made the effort to go to Mar-a-Lago, got her picture taken with Kevin O'Leary and Donald Trump, talked about the Prime Minister needed to do this or that, and then when Trump said that we had nothing in energy that he needed, she must have sat there saying, "Well, what happened to the love affair I had 3 weeks ago?" All of a sudden, he'd completely dismissed her major energy exports from her province. I think that's when she realized he's not really a friend, and I need to get on the playbook with everybody else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Dan, are you involved in any way with providing advice at the moment? Like, what is your role in this crisis now that you're not in politics?
I've talked to some different individuals who I've known a long time. Asked for my opinion on a couple of things, but I'm just staying abreast of it. I'm keeping in touch. I've got some business interests that straddle both sides of the border. I have a place in the United States down in Florida. So I keep in touch on that. And then provincially, there's lots of discussion and dialogue with different leaders who I know, much like you do in Ottawa, Craig. We share many of the same friends in Ottawa, and I've reached out to a couple of them to get their intake of the situation, and also to help inform myself. So I'm better informed when I talk to people like yourself through opportunities like this and others, so that we can try to get the message out. Traditional media is gone, and podcasts like yours are going to become so important to make sure that we get a consistent message out, which is based on fact and how best we can move forward.
100%. Well, thanks for making the time, Dan. Great to chat with you.
Thanks so much, Craig.